Galloway in for Sam Delaney just for the day between 4 and 7 o'clock this evening, and then back, of course, on Friday at 7 p.m. until 10 with the original, the quintessential. The number is the same in any case, 0344 499 1000. Fats Domino has died, aged 89. I'm very sorry to say, of course, we wouldn't be allowed to call him Fats Domino today. I don't know what it would be, challenged, of some kind of challenge he was undoubtedly facing. And that's apropos something. We have to contemplate, I've done my best to avoid it, to be perfectly frank, the suspension from the Labour Party and the withdrawal of the whip from somebody called Jared O'Mara, only recently elected as the Member of Parliament in Sheffield. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, I have never met this man. Indeed, I had never heard of this man until the scandal in which he is now enveloped broke in the public prints. That's one of the reasons why I didn't know that he has cerebral palsy, that he's a registered disabled man. And it's 99% certain that you didn't know that either, because not a single report that I have read or seen or heard, for that matter, has mentioned the fact that this man has this terrible affliction, cerebral palsy. Now, I don't cite that in his defence, because frankly I find his conduct, even his admitted conduct, never mind, and we'll come to it, the conduct that he denies, utterly repugnant. The things that he admits to having written on social media, had they been known, would surely have disqualified him for selection as a Labour candidate in the first place. And it's only, I think, inevitable that they will now be judged by his party in its examination, its investigation, as to whether this man can continue to be a Labour MP at all. That's the thing, you see, is John Holmes and I just agreed before the handover, everybody's got a past. But social media now guarantees that your past is still there. It doesn't go away. And he'll not be the only Member of Parliament whose social media scribblings are currently being scrutinised with a new forensic eye. Although there's a great deal of hypocrisy involved in this story, there always is, on matters of sexuality and personal behaviour on the frontier of people's sex lives. I have never said, and would never say, and it couldn't be on my lips because it would never be in my mind, any of the filthy, ugly, vulgar things that Jared O'Hara admits to having scribbled. But I doubt if he's the only one. Just so you know, I've actually never enjoyed male company very much. I've never been one of the boys. I'm not a drinker, so I've never been lured down the path of barroom banter. It just leaves me cold. But that means I've therefore spent a lot of time with women. Not that I am going to go necessarily into that, except to say I have never breenged at anyone. I have never touched anyone who didn't want to be touched. I've never used the bitch word and never would, though I have, on Katie Hopkins, used a worse word, though it isn't sexist. It's just extremely derogatory. But hey, it was Katie Hopkins. But the point I'm making is that everybody has a past. And if it is true that the woman who now alleges that just months before coming to become a Member of Parliament, when he didn't actually expect to become one, if he did use the sexist, and transphobic. I'm not sure what the words were, but that's what's said. Sexist and transphobic language to a woman in a nightclub. If that stands up, if that turns out to be true, then this man will be a goner. I don't know, we'll never know, if he might have made a significant contribution to public life. But I do know lots of people who did make a significant contribution to public life, who, if Facebook and Twitter had existed when they were contributing to public life, they wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes. I'm only going to skate over, literally, the lives of some of the great figures in British political history. Lloyd George knew my father, as they used to say, was because actually Lloyd George probably knew your mother better than he knew your father. Roy Jenkins, whom I defeated in the general election in 1987 and put out of Parliament and into the House of Lords, about which too more later, had an exceedingly colourful private life, and one which one would never have suspected from looking at him or listening to him. He had a spectacular affair with a very, very important and senior Hollywood actress. He was bisexual and slept with men and their wives. He was a very colourful character. If any whiff of that had ever been found on social media, he would have been out long before he held just about every great office of state. People on the right, people on the left. The late Alan Clark, God rest his soul, was a good friend of mine, a conservative grandee, lived in Saltwood Castle, told us in his own diaries about the colourfulness of his own private life. Tom Dryburgh, whom I tangentially knew, was a rapacious homosexual who was frequently arrested, rarely charged for offences against public morals. So there are serious questions that emerge from someone's case who seems deeply unserious. And it's this: how much of a saint do you want your members of Parliament to be? Do you want your members of Parliament to spend all their time in the library, or, as in this fellow's case, occasionally visit a nightclub, his cerebral palsy notwithstanding? Do you want someone who's asexual, like Ted Heath purported or was purported to be? Or do you want someone who's flesh and blood, who has relations, which necessarily are messy, as all human relations in the end are? Because I tell you what, if you want a parliament of Ted Heaths, you better be careful what you wish for. Just saying. Now, when I read this morning that the 93-year-old former American president, George Bush Sr., patted an actress on the bottom whilst he posed for a picture with her in his wheelchair with his wife standing beside him, just this year, I wondered, how far is this all going to go? How serious was the actress when she said she's not been able to get over it? If she is serious, then I'm very sorry, as he said he is, that she suffered that. Touching someone against their will, bringing at somebody, lunging at someone, patting someone against their will, without their permission, is actually sexual assault. And it turns out now that yet another American president, one of a long, long line in recent times, maybe in historical times too, are guilty of this. And what does that tell us? It tells us that there's a problem with men. There's a problem particularly with powerful men who imagine that they have some entitlement to invade other people's personal space, to try and use their strength, force, to force themselves on women. For me, this is kind of inexplicable because I can't imagine what the pleasure in that would be, how one would feel about oneself afterwards if one had. It's really a very sordid era that we're now living in, because we have to confront the fact, according to the stats that Victoria just read out on the news, half of the women in Britain have been sexually harassed. Half. 1 in 2, and a considerable number probably of the other 2 maybe didn't want to recall it, didn't want to record it. Now, there are plenty of rum characters in the House of Lords too. I don't need to go into some of the recent scandals involving members of the House of Lords. But I can easily tell you this. What used to be a house full of the putrefying aristocracy of the British ruling class has become something much worse. It's become a chamber full of cronies, former flatmates, chums, who have befriended political leaders and sometimes financed political leaders precisely in order to get a permanent seat in the Parliament of Great Britain. And many of them, it turns out in the news today, are picking up hundreds of pounds per day for doing precisely nothing. And now the bar, if you'll forgive the phrase, has not been set high. There are a significant number, some of them quite well known, of members of the House of Lords who neither spoke in the Lords, tabled a question in the Lords, did anything at all in the Lords except come in and pick up their money, dine in the sumptuous restaurants, drink the subsidised alcohol, and no doubt entertain their guests. Has the time not come when somebody, anybody, will say that they will abolish this farcical, unelected, unaccountable, ultra-expensive retirement home for politicians and their chums? Now, speaking of men who abuse their power, we'll be talking about a man who openly boasted that he did, the current president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, whose senators and congressmen are now jumping ship, a ship they surely feel is sinking. And we'll be talking too about the other Russia scandal, not the one that Hillary Clinton's campaign paid for, but the one involving Hillary Clinton, who it turns out gave away 20% of America's uranium to, yes, you guessed it, Russia. And finally, we'll be talking about Brexit. How could we avoid it? It's everywhere. It's looming large. And there's still a state of absolute chaos in the government's ranks. David Davis told us that Parliament will not have a vote on the final terms of the deal, only to be contradicted 20 minutes later by the Prime Minister, who said that they will. Now, I don't know if they got their lines crossed. It seems unlikely to me on a matter of such importance that the Brexit Secretary doesn't know what the government's actual line is on a matter of such monumental importance. But I don't really care about that, because if Parliament gets the opportunity to vote on the deal, they're going to vote it down. Trust me on that. It cannot pass. Even the House of Commons. Never mind the House of Lords, they'll all turn up for that. And where will that leave us? It will leave us, theoretically, as having rejected the deal. But then the pressure for another referendum, yet another never-endum, will become ineluctable. And I'll be talking to John Redwood the veteran Conservative MP, later in the show about that. I'm George Galloway. I'm in for Sam Delaney here on Drive on Talk Radio.